Welcome. I'm Jeff Resnick. I'm Chief of the History of Medicine Division at the National Library of Medicine of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Thank you very much for joining us for today's NLM History Talk. To those of you on Twitter, thanks for following along using the hashtag NLMHistTalk. And for those of you who wish to share questions this afternoon with our speaker, please use the live feedback button you see under your live stream video. The National Library of Medicine's annual series of history talks are intended to promote awareness and use of the library and related historical collections for research, education, and public service in biomedicine, the social sciences, and the humanities. The series also supports the commitment of the library to recognize the diversity of its collections, which span 10 centuries, encompass a range of digital and physical formats, and originate from nearly every part of the world. The series also foregrounds the voices of people of color, women, and individuals of a variety of cultural and disciplinary backgrounds who value these collections and use them to advance their research, their teaching, and their learning. Today's talk is co-sponsored by the National Endowment for the Humanities Office of Digital Humanities as part of the NLM's ongoing partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities to collaborate on research, education, and career initiatives, and specifically the NEH-NLM partnership through Virginia Tech to co-sponsor Data, Health, and the Digital Humanities, Shared Horizons 2. This is a series of all virtual programs and a scholarly book. And to explain this cooperation in detail and to introduce today's distinguished speaker, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tom Ewing of Virginia Tech. Dr. Ewing is a professor in the Department of History at Virginia Tech and the Associate Dean for Graduate Studies and Research in Virginia Tech's College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences. His current research project explores the transmission of information about the so-called Russian influenza of 1889-1890, using data and digital humanities approaches to medical history. At Virginia Tech, Dr. Ewing coordinates the Data in Social Context program, which sustains an interdisciplinary approach of data analytics, computational skills, and critical thinking in the humanities and social sciences. Dr. Ewing, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Resnick. It's my privilege to be a part of this program and for Virginia Tech to receive support from the NEH to organize and lead the Data, Health, and Digital Humanities Shared Horizons 2 initiative you mentioned. This is a workshop that brings together 9 early career scholars working at the intersection of data, health, and digital humanities in a collaborative writing process. These scholars are working on topics related to health equities, biomedicine, reproductive rights, pandemics, maternal health, and community well-being from scholarly perspectives in anthropology, public health history, and museum studies. Each contributor will prepare a chapter to be published in an open access, peer-reviewed volume from Virginia Tech Publishing. This workshop thus fulfills the shared mission of the National Library of Medicine, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and Virginia Tech of engaging public audiences with advanced research that has important implications for social well-being, public policy, and community relations. Dr. Kim Gowland of Brown University delivered the first keynote address for this workshop as part of the History Talk series, and then met with the workshop participants for a fascinating discussion of bringing digital humanities methods into scholarship on data and health. We look forward now to the second keynote address by Dr. Kathleen Kole Peralta, and to her meeting with the workshop participants later this month. Dr. Kole Peralta is a clinical assistant professor of history at Arizona State University. Her research integrates the history of medicine and environment in early modern Iberia and Peru to capture the intrinsic and historical relationship between environment and health in urban areas, and to demonstrate the evolution of health as a fluid, changing concept depending on the cultural context within which it was produced. Her research also uses the digital humanities and open access platforms to make environmental health history accessible to English and Spanish-speaking audiences. During the pandemic, Dr. Kole Peralta pivoted from early modern medicine to documenting COVID-19. She served as project lead on the Journal of the Plague Year, the largest international crowdsourced archive on the pandemic. Dr. Kole Peralta is the author of a book called Murder and Martyrdom, which focuses on the ethnohistory of Spanish Florida, and numerous scholarly articles, including Mal-Olor and Colonial Latin American History, Smellscapes in Lima, Peru, 1535 to 1614, published in the Hispanic American Historical Review, and Public Health and Municipal Water Policies in Colonial Lila, Peru, 1535-1635, published in the Journal of Water History. She has also written blog posts for wider audiences, which have appeared in Nursing Clio, the Recipes Project, and Environmental History Now. Today, Dr. Kole Peralta joins us to present Life After Lockdown, Pandemic Perspectives from Peru. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for such a generous introduction. And I want to say, first and foremost, thank you to the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Library of Medicine for sponsoring this event. And especially thank you to Jeff and Tom for such meticulous planning and for inviting me and putting this really interesting series of talks and workshops together on the history of medicine and the digital humanities, which happen to be two of my favorite subjects. And then I think most importantly for your prioritization of global perspectives. So the research that I'm going to talk about today draws on my experience working with the Journal of the Plague Year, one of the largest digital crowdsourced archives on the COVID-19 pandemic. It also draws on the crowdsourced efforts of another project in Peru called Archivo COVID-19. Now, I know not all of us speak Spanish, so I'll just let you know that Archivo simply means archive, and it's a project built by a few faculty members at the University of San Marcos in Lima, Peru. And for me, because I am a trained early modernist and I normally work in the 16th century, I find it historically poetic that the San Marcos University created a COVID archive, given its history as one of the first medical universities in colonial Peru. So being able to give this talk today means that I get to share some of the materials that were submitted to the archives with you. This includes memes, social media posts, stories, and short videos that highlight pandemic stories that people wanted to record and wanted the world to remember. My talk today seeks to understand the pandemic experience in Peru primarily through the lens of these crowdsourced materials. It reflects what people gave to the archives and the stories they wanted to share. So therefore, this presentation is in no way comprehensive or complete. It can, however, and will draw some important observations about the way that people discussed public health mandates and disease mitigation efforts. I want to give a little bit of context to make sure that the audience is all on the same page before I transition into a more nuanced discussion of the pandemic in Peru. So let me start with a few terms: crowdsourced, digital humanities, public history, and the social web. What does crowdsourced mean? Crowdsourced is a term used to describe a process where the public actively contributes to a project. This can be in the form of donating time and expertise, as in the case of transcription projects, such as those held at the Smithsonian Transcription Center that ask the public to become digital volunteers and transcribe historical documents. Those documents are then eventually made public and easier for people to access because of the transcription process. It can also come in the form of donations, as in the case of archives that seek contributions to collect historical materials. These can often be physical, but in the case of COVID-19 and for the JOPI and San Marcos archive, these were digital crowdsourcing efforts. So both of the archives were asking their audiences, aka the public at large, to contribute digital objects that tell us something about the pandemic. Now, for the digital humanities and public history, these terms can sometimes get confused because sometimes they're interchangeable and sometimes they coexist on the same project. I guess not interchangeable, but they can coexist is a better way to phrase it. So the simple way that I like to separate the two in my mind is that the digital humanities gets at the question, how? So this is usually answered by incorporating digital tools into the methodology. So the process of research and collecting data, and sometimes even the presentation of that data. By contrast, public history seeks to answer a different question. It's really asking for whom. So in other words, sharing and disseminating the research with a particular audience is the key driving force of the project. In the case of many COVID-19 archives, and there are over 6,000 that we know of, the digital humanities and public history intersect in the same project. The COVID-19 pandemic, as a contagious and deadly public health crisis, necessitated projects that were socially distanced. Digital tools and even the collection of born digital objects facilitated remote collection projects that were cast widely across the Web 2.0, or what public historians often call the social web. The social web draws on the internet and social media networks to actively recruit the public and encourage participation. Digital crowdsourcing as a methodology seeks to democratize the production of history by allowing the general public to contribute their experiences and their expertise. Therefore, ideally, more people participate in the preservation of, but also the production of history. The digital crowdsourced archive resolves some obstacles while creating others. And one of the most obvious is that these projects require a level of digital literacy, or at least the ability to navigate to a project website and move through a submission page with relative ease. Moreover, internet access and devices that can navigate the Web 2.0 are ubiquitous, but far from universal. In the US alone, the FCC estimates that some 19 million Americans do not have fixed broadband service at threshold speeds. Another 100 million people don't just subscribe to any internet service. In Peru, 65.3% of the population has internet access, which means that over 1/3 of the population was offline at the beginning of 2022. So think about what that means. We know immediately that there are differences between rural and urban spaces, but we're also seeing differences in how people access and use the internet. So it's important to remember that of the population that is online, a significant portion may only be accessing the internet through mobile phones. In Peru, you may also have limited data plans. So the likelihood that someone is going to be sitting on their mobile phone using part of their monthly minutes or data allotment to contribute to an archive steadily diminishes. Therefore, immediately from the get-go, we know that there is a huge digital-driven silence in any crowdsourced archive. But all is not lost. We can still make sense of the materials that do get submitted and collect around groups of people like children, older adults, the economically impoverished, and this helps us understand what the pandemic means to distinct groups of people. This approach builds on disaster studies literature, which contends that whether natural or man-made, disasters make more sense to us over space and time. As Scott Knowles and Zachary Loeb contend, disaster studies strive to reveal and understand structures and truths that existed well before the event ever happened. They write, quote, "Disasters operate as realms of sense-making, conflict, memory, cultural practice, and imagination that define and bind societies over long stretches of time," end quote. So having lived through the pandemic, some of this rings intuitively true. In the US context, the shortage of healthcare workers and medical supplies did not reveal a new problem. For years, the healthcare industry has been tremendously short-staffed, leading to a dependency on foreign workers to offset the gap. COVID simply made these challenges more apparent and more urgent to resolve. The pandemic in Peru revealed strains placed on a health system that is designed to be unequal. The health system in Peru is decentralized, meaning that it comprises government and non-government coverage. This includes the Ministry of Health, eSalud, a separate segment for the armed forces and the national police, and then one that covers a private sector. So generally, individuals without private insurance are forced to go to public hospitals for medical attention, where facilities are under-equipped and overcrowded. Not to mention, in both the private and public sectors, patients are often expected to pay for medications on demand. So this means that if someone you know becomes ill, or if you yourself become ill, the burden is placed on you or a loved one to go and acquire those medical necessities and bring them to the healthcare facility where they're needed. All of this is to say that the system is different. It has its challenges, many of which were heavily scrutinized during the early waves of the COVID-19 pandemic. So now let's think about sense-making. How can we make sense of the pandemic in Peru, and how have Peruvians also made sense of the pandemic? To answer these questions, I'm going to draw on the Journal of the Plague Year, and I'm also going to look at the Archivo COVID Peru, which was created in Peru by Peruvians at the National University of San Marcos in Lima. Now, JOPI's collection, and JOPI is just the short version of Journal of the Plague Year, which gets a little tiring to keep repeating, so I'll say JOPI now. Joppy's collection has many international collections. Peru is one of those international collections. So it's one area of focus within the archive that sought to collect a range of materials, which include local and international news, home video footage, personal photos, oral histories, social media posts, and memes. The San Marcos archive collected video testimonies and social media materials related to the intersection between society and the state, with the stated goal of offering the public narratives about the pandemic. The San Marcos archive is broken down into three main sections: testimonies, images, and San Marquinos, which are the students and staff associated with the university. Many of these items are what you might expect to find in a COVID-19 archive, such as political cartoons, photos, and social media posts. Yet there are two distinct sense-making trends in the archive that embody a very distinct architecture. In particular, the archive houses a whole section dedicated to violence, and another called Vacuna Gate, so playing off of the term Watergate, which was essentially a section that publicly published the names of well-known Peruvians, often politicians, who received expedited vaccines thanks to their political connections. The San Marcos archive states that one of its objectives is to register how, during the period of fear of COVID-19, authorities reacted violently towards citizens. And this category includes violence against the body, violence against public health, violence against the Amazons, and anti-Asian violence. Now, at first, violence may strike us as a strange category. What violence are archivists referring to? In part, it's important to have a little bit of context. So Lima, Peru, the capital of Peru, has a history of recent violence. To contextualize, for over a decade, beginning in the late 1980s, a terrorist organization known as Shining Path worked to overthrow the national government and concentrated its attacks on the capital city. So this included random car bombings and over 25,000 fatalities. Consequently, Lima entered a state of emergency and put its over 7 million residents at the time under curfew, meaning that people were not allowed to go out in the streets between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. In addition, there were periods where police and tanks actively patrolled the streets, enforcing the curfew and public order. So the return of patrols to Lima streets has triggered memories of the violent 1980s. Limanian author Jose Donagne Dovkin, discussing the pandemic, captures this cultural memory. He writes, quote, "Perhaps the most perturbing part to process mentally is accepting the armed forces in the streets, whose presence has transported many to remember the most difficult and painful situations of violence and terror that reigned in our country from 1980 to 1996. Therefore, for the generation of Peruvians who lived in Lima during the 1980s and 1990s, national police, just their mere presence in the streets and their control of foot and motor traffic, rematerializes a generational trauma. This extends beyond public spaces. The San Marcos archive asserts that the state's handling of the Amazon region amounted to government-sanctioned violence. The Amazon is a richly biodiverse region comprised of rainforest. It spans across several countries, including Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. The Amazonian city of Iquitos tends to be the launching off point into the region because it's the last major city accessible by road. To go any further requires taking a boat, and some communities are so remote that it can take 3 or 4 days to get there by boat. Thus, this is a region with very isolated areas with minimal connections to the outside world. Some of these communities, such as Uraina, were completely unaware of the COVID-19 virus until the arrival of vaccine distributors in November 2021. But isolation was not the case for all Amazonian communities, such as those along the Loreto and Ucayali rivers. These areas lacked the sanitation and healthcare infrastructure needed to stave off disaster. While these communities are remote, they are nevertheless large. They are home to hundreds of thousands of people and comprise nearly 1,000 communities throughout the Peruvian Amazon. For example, Iquitos, which is the largest city, has a population of over 500,000 people. A study conducted in July 2020 surveyed 470 communities and found that two of the biggest waves and outbreaks in this region occurred in April to June and in August 2020. Moreover, as these outbreaks are occurring, there's a large surge in demand for basic items like masks, sanitizers, soap, and other medical supplies. But because these items are imported from cities where these items are also in demand, the price became much more expensive and sometimes prohibitively so. The inaction of the state becomes, according to the collecting strategies of archivists, an act of extreme neglect, a neglect so horrendous that it manifests as violence. In particular, the archive highlights 44 Amazonian communities whose vulnerability has intensified due to limited access to medical attention and basic sanitation. The archive notes, the Peruvian state does not understand the gravity and urgency of the problems that pre-existed in this region, and even now, more so, that it is suffering an elevated rate of infections and deaths due to the virus. The materials housed in this section of violence against the Amazons bear witness to this situation. A video testimony, which is like an oral history, recorded by Pilar Acre in Cantagallo, humanizes this abandonment. Acre reports that she lives in a community with 400 families surviving day to day. She details how there's just one water pump in the community and that everyone lines up every day to fill their containers with water. She mentions the uncertainty of standing in line with a bunch of people, not knowing if someone was asymptomatic. She recalls that when public health propaganda, in her words, reached Cantagallo and told people to wash their hands every 20 minutes, the mandate felt unreasonable. In her words, quote, where there is no water, it's impossible that we could have complied with all of this, end quote. Thus, without even a sufficient water supply and the mounting costs of basic necessities, Cantagallo needed some sort of state intervention to adequately combat COVID-19 spread. However, the fact that archivists and people living in the Amazon can express this discontent highlights just how social media has changed the way humans experience pandemics and the ways that public historians have changed the way that they document them. With this virus in particular, social media amplified public outcry and provided a channel to hold politicians and public health organizations accountable. The social media posts archived by San Marcos call out many institutions, including the Ministry of Health, other Peruvian agencies, and even international organizations such as the CIDH, which is the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. One image, for example, from March 2021 states, the second wave of COVID-19 continues in the indigenous communities of Loreto. At the bottom of the post, it calls viewers to action, ask for help, and urgent medical attention. Another tweet from the same user that month demanded that the state send medical protection equipment and help stabilize the outbreak in isolated villages. In April 2020, Iquitos grabbed the international attention for the collapse of its hospital. Without sufficient supplies to preserve the dead properly, hospital staff resorted to trash bags and tape, making it difficult for families to identify their loved ones. Now I'm about to share a video that someone shared with the archive that captures what this collapse looked like. It's a little bit disturbing to watch, so please avert your eyes if you are sensitive to loss and mourning and what it may look like when it's not functioning properly. This video is just a few 30 seconds. So reportedly, in Iquitos in this stage in April, over 80% of the mortalities were caused due to a lack of oxygen tanks. Local church leaders seized on this opportunity to appeal for donations to build an oxygen plant in Iquitos. And these efforts did work. There was a lot of international donations that came in, and with 18 months, 2 new plants were built in the Amazon, reducing the region's dependency on outside suppliers. The Peruvian Amazon battled an epidemic that they were ill-equipped to face. The shortage of personal hygiene supplies and protective medical equipment underscores a large disparity in healthcare access in remote rural areas. For the people living in this region, they felt condemned and abandoned, condemned to watch their loved ones die, perhaps needlessly, due to a broken medical infrastructure. But this talk would be overlooking another distinct subset of violence in this archive if I failed to mention the intersection between social media and violence against the body. This section captures the willful neglect or disregard for public health safety protocols and illuminates how social media fed into a system of citizen surveillance. Notably, journalists and social media users whose stories end up in this section of the archive do not use the term violence, but they are expressing a shared critique and often public shaming of actors who failed to wear masks and avoid public gatherings. Some of the most visibly critiqued actors are political officials who were shamed on social media and news outlets. In this image shown here, in November 2020, the crowds at a municipal soccer event in Cajamarca drew the wrath of national news outlets that critiqued city officials for violating biosecurity measures during COVID-19. That same month, the alcalde of Trujillo, who's shown here, was photographed drinking, dancing, and chatting up guests at an indoor party when indoor bans on indoor gatherings were still in place. So this party shouldn't have even taken place, yet here he is at a party, and this image is being circulated in some of Peru's newspapers. The headline of the newspaper Diario Correo reads, "The alcalde of Trujillo is asked to set an example during the pandemic after being spotted at a party." Repeatedly, news outlets and social media users published photographs in digital gotcha moments that lambasted prominent citizens for breaking pandemic social distancing rules. Citizen surveillance even reached into local neighborhoods. One of the more contentious activities was COVID parties. Now, in the US context, these were often parties intentionally thrown to catch COVID. In Peru, COVID parties is a term used to refer to parties that were illegally held because of the ban and mandates against indoor gatherings. A national newspaper reported a story where police busted more than 30 individuals at a clandestine Halloween party. Another incident from Iquitos critiques an illegal party that was held at the house of a student who was actually currently enrolled in the police academy. The party began at 8 p.m. and was shut down by police at 3 a.m. And one of the neighbors who gave his own take on it said, quote, "My entire family could not sleep due to the scandal they were making in that house. The police arrived just in time. How is it possible that during a pandemic and with the very real possibility of spreading contagion, they are having parties?" Adding to this emphasis of violence by the state against its people and by citizens against neighbors, I'd like to add a third category, which is violence against the environment. The pandemic accelerated the consumption and disposal of personal protection equipment, hygiene products, and one-use packaging for food, medical tests, and vaccines. Hand in hand with this reliance on disposable resources was the increase in plastic pollution. In particular, there are several plastic polymers, such as polystyrene, polyethylene, and polypropylene, which are common components of affordable PPE. However, when they're mismanaged, as in not properly disposed of and captured in waste removal systems, their mismanagement means that these materials will remain in the landscape or even reach the ocean and threaten the marine environment. In a study conducted in Lima, researchers tracked the PPE left at 11 different coastal sites, shown here. They tracked these sites from September to December 2020 and actually found that most of the trash wasn't washing up from the ocean, but rather the masks and other PPE were being left by visitors at recreational beaches. In the JOPI archive, there are a series of photos that comprise what's called the Mask Trash series, which are photos that cover places in the US, but also Peru, and they simply document how fabric and disposable masks clutter the landscape. Here are 3 taken from Peru. So people worldwide adjusted to wearing masks in public, and while they were necessary to slow the rate of transmission, they came with environmental costs. These photos capture a continuous cycle of pedestrians dropping masks and leaving them behind, and then the actual physical removal of that object is left in question. Who's going to come and pick up this mask? If you drop a mask on the campus of Arizona State University, it won't be there more than 2 hours because there's a team of landscaping people who will come through and make sure everything's looking right. That's not true in all areas. So the physical removal of the object and its potentially toxic ingredients in urban spaces like here in Arequipa is left up to bystanders or to municipal sanitation workers. These photos attempt to pin down some of these more ephemeral stories of environmental violence. So now I want to pivot from the heavier topic of violence to the lighter subject of humor. One of the strengths of the JOPI archive is that it recognized early on that memes were incredibly valuable sources of pandemic history. Now, I'm a trained colonial Latin American historian. My research typically looks at environment and health in the 16th century, but this training provided certain advantages when working on a digital project documenting a current event. So as any historian who works on the modern era knows, we're often limited not by the questions we want to ask about the past, but the sources. Do the sources we want exist? And if they do exist, can we ask them? Or can we access them? So often the answer is you can ask the question, but you may not be able to answer it. The sources simply may not be there. They may be behind some sort of preservation system in an archive, not out in circulation, or somewhere else, not even known of yet. So kept in someone's personal archive. So I say all of this to give some context for how I thought about my role as a historian documenting the pandemic. In my case, I wanted to capture the types of information and stories that I really wish I had for the 16th century. And one of those areas is humor, because when you study the 16th century, you can get a sense of what people laugh at, maybe from literature, novels, theater, but you're not really sure what the joke is all of the time. Humor tells us what people think is funny. And unlike most newspapers, social media provides extra clues into how people felt about a particular joke. So when documenting humor, I tried to follow major social media accounts. And one important aspect was always to document how people reacted. So what were the comments? What did people say? Who was it shared by? And then if possible, how does this meme mutate over time? How does its meaning change when it's shared across different platforms? We also asked contributors to tell us why their story matters. This is a very important distinction between JOPI and the San Marcos archive. For JOPI, we ask people, tell us a story, tell us why this matters. And so we get a little bit more information than just the object itself, which is important because while we may get the joke today, someone visiting this archive 50 or 100 years from now may not get it. Thus, by contextualizing humor with metadata, which are the tags and keywords used to organize materials in the archive, we are able to make these items more accessible to the public and researchers. So the popularity of memes and their circulation and mutation is a clear signal that they should be taken seriously as pandemic objects. So this object here was posted by the Being Peruvian Instagram account. And the meme states, "The only beso I want." A beso is a kiss, and a beso de moza, which you can see here, literally translates as the kiss of a young girl. It's a candy, it's a marshmallow covered with chocolate. So yeah, a nice, sweet treat. But the joke here is the double entendre between a physical kiss, between two people, and the candy kiss. There's also an additional layer of meaning because in Peru, it's customary to greet people with a kiss on the cheek. Therefore, the joke is making light of what is otherwise a pretty disruptive shift in social norms. Another meme, which was posted by a different Instagram account, makes light of some of Peru's authoritarian social controls. Peru had some of the strictest lockdown regulations. How strict, you may find yourself asking? Just to give a snapshot of what it looked like. During the first total lockdown, which lasted from March to May 2020, children were not allowed to go outside. People were only allowed to leave their homes on certain days to purchase food and other necessary items. If you needed, for some reason, to take a bus or a taxi, you had to have a special permit allowing you to use public transportation. Not only that, but using transportation, public transportation, meant that in some cases you had to wear a mask. At other stages, it meant a mask and a face shield, so extra layers of protection when moving around the city. There was a ban on indoor gatherings, and most urban spaces had a nighttime curfew that prohibited people from leaving their homes. So one social control strategy, and this was just a way to cut down the number of people in public, was to alternate the days that men and women could go outside. So immediately, just based on gender, the number of people in the streets should be about half the population. So I'm going to show you a video that was submitted from Arequipa. The person submitting the video is talking in Spanish about what they're seeing. I'll play a few seconds of the video and then I'll tell you what she's saying. Maybe.
El día de hoy estamos acá en el supermercado Totus y el día de hoy, como es día sábado, solo pueden transitar las mujeres. Entonces, y la cola son colas inmensas, inmensas acá en el supermercado, como pueden ver. O sea, todo eso es solo como una especie de culebra que es desde ahí atrás. Más o menos son algo de...
So she's talking about this immense line, and she says it's Saturday, it's the day that only women are allowed to go out. All of these women are lined up outside of Totus, which is a brand of supermarket. So they're all kind of snaking through the parking lot, waiting to get in. And she estimates that there are about 1,000 people in line waiting to go in and be able to shop. Now compare this. So this was a regulation that was put in place. This is how it played out on the ground. But that doesn't mean that people didn't make fun of it, which the next meme will show. So this is a meme posted by the Instagram account Peru Memes that says shopping on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So it shows a bunch of men returning from the store carrying these red cases. They may not immediately be recognizable to you all, so I'm going to tell you what they are. These red cases are cases of beer. So in Peru, you go to the store or the corner store, you buy a case. The beer comes in glass bottles, you drink the glass bottles, and then you return them to the store so they get recycled. So the joke here is one, making fun of social controls, but it's also making fun of giving men 3 days a week to shop, suggesting that they might use this time perhaps irresponsibly to just buy a bunch of beer and go home. Another significant contributor to the archive was the political cartoonist Andres Ederi. He's actually a cartoonist for the Lima newspaper El Comercio. He has several cartoons called Pandemic Diaries that touch on different aspects of the pandemic. Sometimes he's documenting the international context, such as this image here, which shows the race to create vaccines. You can see the vaccines being hurled at a target. This is vacuna, which is vaccine, and then the different flags of the countries trying to reach that goal. Here, he's making a little light of delivery, so the uptick in having food delivery services. So he has the title for the book, Hansel and Gretel in COVID Times. You can see here that Hansel and Gretel can't get in because the witch is saying only delivery. So they can't get in to her house, and consequently, maybe it's a better outcome for Hansel and Gretel thanks to COVID Times. Some of the images document real events happening, so events specific to Peru. This one documents the events of May 15th, 2020, when children were finally allowed to go out for the first time since lockdown began. So you can see this dad letting his kid go out, he's chasing him, and then resting after that. So I think the caption was something like, first day kids are allowed outside, first day of exercise. And then he says, coincidence when he posts it. Other cartoons that he made show a little bit of a darker side of humor that hint at larger health inequities. So for example, this image reads, the oxygen will arrive only if you have a ton of money. So you can see you've got a black market salesman here telling this old man, got a ton of money, I can help you. If not, I can't. So this image is not far off from reality. The price of oxygen tanks skyrocketed because of an oxygen shortage. And part of this relates to, it's very different how we get our oxygen for hospitals here in the US versus how it's produced in Peru. So this created a shortage. And in some regions, the black market price tripled. So people were reportedly paying a 1,000% markup on black market oxygen tanks. I'm going to share another quick video that helps explain a little bit about what's happening and how this increase in price is affecting families who are trying to purchase medical items for their loved ones.
Demand for oxygen in Peru has exceeded supply. With hospitals running out during the country's punishing second COVID wave, families have to buy their own. A single cylinder can cost up to $400 on the black market. The lack of oxygen helps make Peru the country with the world's highest death rate per capita from COVID-19. Thousands have died in Lima in recent months. And this is where many of them end up, the vast Virgen de Lourdes Cemetery. That's Lenin Froilan. He spent more than $6,000 on oxygen to try to help his mother before she died from COVID.
Medicinas y oxígeno. Pero de nada sirvió.
How did this happen, and why is medical oxygen so expensive? We met Lenin standing in line to get oxygen for his mother one day before she died. He had been waiting since 4 a.m.
Estamos obligados a estar así. ¿Por qué? Porque tenemos que hacer cola por casa.
This plant on the southern outskirts of the capital offers free medical oxygen to those with a prescription, but the wait is anywhere from 12 to 15 hours. People eat and sleep in line until it's their turn. They're only allowed to fill one 10 cubic meter cylinder every 48 hours. That won't do for Lenin's family. A patient with severe COVID-19 needs up to 3 cylinders a day. His 3 sisters have COVID too, so he's had to spend thousands of dollars on additional cylinders wherever he can find them. Lenin sells furniture and earns about $650 a month, so he's relied on the last of his savings.
Pero ya no hay plata. Lo que acá es, se han aprovechado, el sector salud se ha aprovechado.
So when he's saying that they've taken advantage of the health sector, what he's talking about are the black market vendors who were actively going to places where the COVID outbreak wasn't as extreme, buying up oxygen tanks, and then taking them to areas where the COVID outbreak was more intense, and then selling those to people who needed them. Because as you saw from the video, 1 oxygen tank a day is not going to be sufficient. Actually, that was 1 tank per 48 hours. So in most cases, you had to resort to some other method of purchasing this necessary medical supply in the event of severe COVID. I also want to highlight the physical, emotional, and economic toll of being responsible to acquire these medical supplies and how it put people like Lenin in a horribly desperate and unsustainable position. So what does life after lockdown look like in Peru? Well, some of the strict social mandates have remained in place. This image from June 2022 shows the entrance to a mall and the security check happening as you enter the mall. Security checks like these are common at major stores like supermarkets, banks, and other places of public business. Essentially what's happening is everyone entering the mall needs to demonstrate verification that they have been vaccinated. So you have to show your ID, you have to show your vaccine card, and that vaccine card has to have more than just the 2 doses. It's got to have the required boosters. So at this point in summer 2020, or summer but winter for them, 2022, you had to have the 3rd booster. And then you also have to have an N95 mask when you're going in, or a double mask. So this security guard dressed all in red in the biohazard suit is checking for all of these things before you can go into the mall. And then it's expected that you keep your mask on inside. So these types of social control efforts are still being upheld in certain spaces. But despite these controls, Peru did not fare well during the pandemic. So to date, it has one of the highest death tolls per capita from COVID-19. And public health experts have blamed 4 principal factors for this failure. 1 is a lack of tests, 2, the irregularity of quarantine, 3, crowded markets and banks, and 4, overcrowded housing. So concerning the latter 3 conditions, it's important to know that the economy depends on an informal labor force that accounts for 70% of economic activity. So this means that over half the population is subsisting on an economy that functions day to day. So given this reality, many people felt pressured or even obligated to disregard public health orders and social distancing guidelines because it felt more important to subsist economically. If you will recall the discussion of the Amazons earlier, you may be able to imagine some of the factors that contributed to such a devastating loss. Taken at total deaths, again, Peru had enormous loss, and this means that the majority of Peruvians lost someone close to them, whether a friend or family member. This had huge impacts on how funerals were practiced and observed, and how people bereaved and coped with the loss of loved ones. Suspended burials and funerals devastated families. In a country that is predominantly Catholic, funeral practices and the tradition of mourning and wakes are very important steps in the spiritual process of letting someone move on, but also for those left behind to move on. So the idea of not being able to bury or properly mourn a loved one is essentially unheard of. And Lima's church leaders took an opportunity to reimagine what mourning traditions could look like with COVID-19. So I'm going to show one example from the Cathedral of Lima in June 2020, where they had more than 5,000 parishioners filling the space. So all of the photos that you see here, I mentioned 5,000 parishioners. These are the deceased parishioners known to the cathedral whose images were printed out and put into the cathedral to be part of this funeral service. The mass was filmed, excerpts of it circulated online, and this symbolized a new path forward for grief and mourning and the ways that people and communities could adapt. Peruvians came around to the idea of virtual funerals and used spaces like Facebook and WhatsApp to create digital wakes. The loss of life was enormous, and for survivors, it has dramatically changed the way that people think about friendship and family members moving forward. In the words of Rocio Vargas, "After so much loss, I feel so much joy to see my friends and family. These moments together have become much more precious and valuable to me. Finally, unequal access to basic healthcare and even essential hygiene resources like running water, soap, face masks highlight vast health inequities. This disparity exists in the Amazons, but it's also true in urban centers like Lima, where there are distinct class divisions between wealthy and impoverished sectors. In wealthy neighborhoods like Miraflores, shown here on the edge of the ocean, residents live more comfortably. They don't worry about running water. They have hand sanitizer and a steady income provided normally by work from home arrangements. In the southern and northern cones of the city, so at the extremes of the city, there are mass populations that are often housed in informal housing, often without sewer systems. Sometimes there's electricity, but usually water is not kind of guaranteed to every residence. So it makes it much more difficult to navigate through a public health crisis. Residents living in the northern and southern cones testified that they didn't have running water or soap. Some were even scrubbing their hands with laundry detergent if they couldn't find anything else. Many who worked in the day-to-day economy had lost their source of income and faced food scarcity. So one trend that began with the pandemic but has continued today because of inflation is cooking meals in the olla común, which is a common pot. So this is a practice that was popular in the 1980s and it's come back. It's essentially one big pot where family members or neighbors all add what they can to this pot in order to make some semblance of a stew that everyone can eat. So while there are many more segues and paths into the crowdsourced archive, for the sake of time and clarity, I want to conclude with a reflection on crowdsourced archiving. Quarantine inspired rich digital and socially distant public history projects worldwide. Data collection methods varied, but in the case of JOTP, we intentionally built collections around a conglomerate of institutions and individuals. A defining aspect of COVID-19 was its global reach. JOTP collected in a way that recognized that the experience in the US was not the only pandemic experience. Therefore, to better understand this moment, historians needed to use the digital humanities to capture the wider historical and cultural moment. Thank you.
Dr. Kole Peralta, thank you very much for that great presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Okay, wonderful. Thank you very, very much. It was a really thought-provoking presentation with all of its richness and in the digital assets that you showed us. Thank you. We're going to move into Q&A, and I'll just remind those who are watching, look for the live feedback button under the video stream, and you can use that button to send questions to me, which I'll have the privilege of asking Dr. Kole Peralta this afternoon. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and they're quite, some of them are quite similar. So I've taken the liberty of consolidating a few of them.
Okay.
They speak to your source material, how you use that material, and some kind of big picture thinking about the future, actually. So the first question is, you spoke about how historians are limited, not by the questions they ask, but by the sources they can consult. How will historians of the future sort through the vast volume of source material associated with the COVID pandemic, like the material that you shared? And then a related question is, how will this material be preserved for future historians to study, or individuals of other disciplines?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So in terms of making sense of the source material, it really depends on, when you do archival research, research depends really on the archivist and how much work the archivist put into categorizing and organizing the materials that they have. So if an archivist isn't attuned to your research question, they may have just kind of put everything in a folder and stuck it away. And that can be true with, kind of digital folders as well. So with JOTP, we have a really rich system of metadata that builds on what the Library of Congress uses and then gets more and more specific. So we first kind of broad picture categorize things. So into normal categories like neighborhoods, national news. So that's kind of a starting point. But then we have curatorial tags and contributor tags that zoom in more specifically on issues. So for whoever contributes the item was allowed to suggest their own tags. So they might have suggested something like sanitizer, inequity, indigenous, whatever that was. We keep that tag, and that tag is linked to any other story with those tags. So that's one way to get specifically by a term to the story you're looking for. And then the curators, who were largely undergraduate and graduate students at ASU, but also around the world, would also come through and tag it with things that they found important, whether it's vaccine, mask, whatever relates to the story. And so metadata in a way becomes hugely important because it creates the paths into the archive. Without metadata and organization, there's really no way to make sense of what's in the archive. And the way we organized it is different from the way San Marcos, from their archive, which has kind of 3 overarching categories. And then within that, a focus on violence and a focus on some other aspects, such as people and students associated with the university itself. So it really depends on the archive, but it also depends on the researcher. It's always good practice to understand the limitations of the organization system you're working with and then try to get around it. Never assume that just because whether it's in physically or digitally, if you type in your keywords and nothing pops up, that doesn't mean it's not in the archive. It just means it may not be immediately visible. In terms of preservation, this is a huge concern, and it's a huge problem with digital humanities projects, is that, as I mentioned, there are over 6,000 crowdsourced COVID archives that got off the ground. How many of those will be around in 5 to 10 to 50 years really depends on that team and the steps that they take now to preserve the project. In the case of JOTP, we're working on creating a way to archive it permanently with the library at ASU so that it will be around. And when I'm working with archives such as the archive in Peru, I'm largely kind of screenshotting everything I find important for myself, just because I don't want to ever be in a position where I'm coming back to that archive and something's happened. It's not there. It's kind of been erased from the digital space. So it's really important to know that digital materials can be ephemeral and can disappear. So we have to treat them carefully as well.
Thank you. I'll add to that. As the interview we did with you on our blog, Circulating Now, mentioned at its conclusion, your web collecting initiative is among the many that the National Library Medicine team collected and preserved from our vantage point using the Internet Archive, Archive It tool. And the Internet Archive, of course, recently launched their COVID-19 web archive, of which, by extension, your project is a part. So perhaps also the redundancy that's at play, the thoughtful redundancy, the collaboration among and between organizations will preserve these resources for the future along all the lines that you rightly described as well. So a couple of other questions we have. Are these archives used by the communities whose stories are being told? Is there a generational dimension? Do parents and grandparents want to tell stories for future generations? And what are some lessons from COVID to prepare for the next pandemic?
So I think we've seen some K through 12 classrooms using the materials in the archive for limited kind of teaching segments, but I think it's going to take time for people to want to return to this as a moment to learn from. I think, especially in the US case, we're still in a stage of pandemic fatigue. So we're not really interested in talking about the pandemic, learning lessons from it. We are interested in moving on and just going back to whatever semblance of life is normal as possible. With older adults, so those aged over 60, there was a bit of a digital divide there in that we didn't see as many older adults contributing to JOTP. And this was an initiative that some of the students working on the archive addressed, or classes associated with the archive created special oral history projects to go out and interview people and capture their stories. So I think one challenge was that many people who contributed oral histories didn't think that their history was worth preserving. And this is just as true with older adults. We also have a motherhood collection, and it's a similar situation where many of the women interviewed just said, how is this important, right? There's a pandemic going on. Why is my experience at home with my kids important, and why does that need to be preserved? So it's really important to know that these everyday stories, everyday experiences from people from across the social spectrum give us a better representation of what life was like. So it's important, just as it's great to see what's happening at the national level, we want to see what's happening on the ground too. And this led to some really organic and interesting collections in the archive, such as the mental health collection, which kind of after, I would say the first 8 months of the pandemic, we saw many more contributions about mental health, because I think people were really kind of acknowledging and wanting to talk about anxiety and the struggle that the pandemic was causing in their lives. There was one more part to that question. What was it? Where did
I think do parents and grandparents want to tell stories for future generations? Perhaps you could unpack that. Did you find that there was there are intergenerational stories, intergenerational interactions in the archive?
So we've had some tracing of who's contributing to the archive, but I don't know that we've been able to identify multiple people from a similar family contributing, although that would be a fascinating project for a student to undertake, would be to kind of track these threads. In terms of grandparents wanting to contribute, I think they were certainly willing to participate in the oral histories. I don't think we had organically as many people over 60 coming on their own to the archive. It really was at the behest of a student affiliated with the archive asking them to participate and saying, we need to preserve, this experience for future generations.
Thank you. Someone's written in to remind me that the digital humanities, of course, that represent methodologies and tools that can, in fact, and do preserve stories that would otherwise not be recorded or not really accessible through traditional analog media. So of course, that's one of the salient important aspects of the digital humanities. So I appreciate the person writing in to remind me of that. Someone else has written in, thank you for your fascinating presentation. I learned a lot about life in Peru during the past few years. Are other scholars of Latin America looking at neighboring countries in similar ways, that is through digital resources or through your archive? Is this looking at digital resources a common practice among Latin American scholars, or was it prevalent before COVID? And how did COVID accelerate it, if in fact that's the case?
Yeah, I think it's both. So there are already existing strong hubs associated largely with universities and museums doing digital history work and prioritizing this type of work. There's a great conference in Mexico City every year that's focused on the digital humanities. So there are universities there where people are actively tuned to thinking about digital projects, and COVID archives, of course, that popped up in Mexico. Colombia is another great hub in Bogota. Again, a group of scholars and students who are actively working on the digital humanities. Chile, again, had a great kind of corpus of people working on it. And in the JAPI archive, the other well-represented section from South America was, or not South America, but Central America, was Costa Rica. So it's really fascinating. It's a series of longitudinal oral histories conducted by Carmen Curi. So she interviews 12 people and she goes back 3 times. So she talks to them at the beginning of the pandemic, 2021, and then has gone back in 2022 to kind of follow up and see how their experience has changed. So there's a lot of great diverse representation, but it would also, take some more crawling of the web to see what's happened since COVID started and what projects people created.
Thank you. And you just mentioned museums, and there's actually a question that's come in about museums. Do you see museums working to include these sources in current or future exhibitions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So here at JAPI at ASU, we actually created a traveling exhibit. One was focused on Arizona pandemic stories, and that went to the Arizona Historical Society. but we also created a larger exhibit that touched on various themes that we saw in the archive as a whole, not any one specific collection. And that exhibit has gone to Los Angeles, and we're hoping to let it go and kind of tour with some of our partner institutions, which include museums. But yeah, I think museums at a certain point will want to include COVID as part of, an exhibit, and especially in thinking about health and history and how to present that to the public. This is a great source of stories to share.
Thank you. That's great. That sounds like a great exhibition. Another question's come in. Can you discuss the difference between the use of these digital resources by public historians versus more academic historians? Is there a difference? I presume, is there a difference in how these sources are being used?
Well, so I think one thing that's challenging is how recent this material is. So traditional academic historians will look at sources from 2020, 2021, and 2022 and just say, that's not history. History is what happened, at least 10 years ago, or whatever that clean threshold is. We need time and space to be able to think and reflect and really make sense of the past, right? Because space does give us an advantageous viewpoint to think about materials. For the public historian, the goal here is we want to show people how we're using and thinking about the materials they've submitted and the value of their stories, and that we are kind of trying to get these materials back into the public. So one way of doing that is through the museum exhibit, through this talk. My challenge, the challenge to me now is to figure out how to get an audience in Peru and to show them, thank you for your stories. Here's a product that is tangible, that you can see, not just an article, but something really that people can engage with and think about and learn from in a meaningful way. I don't want to just write an article and say, read this. I want it to be something, and that's what public historians work on, is it's got to be something that the public wants to engage with, and that's simply probably not an article. It's got to be some other format.
Thank you. Yeah, it will be your point about that line. Is it 5 years ago? Is it 10 years ago? For most historians, as you rightly said, too soon. However, the question remains that the sheer volume of the material that the digital age is presenting will inevitably, that will be the source, the base of sources for future historians, and how future historians will grapple with the access to the material, if preserved, is a very, very complex question, which you addressed earlier, of course. Another question's come in about the challenges of recording history when you don't really know the outcome. So history in progress, if you will. You're in a historic moment that is progressing and moving forward rapidly. The plague year, this person writes, becomes plague years. So can you speak to kind of literally the currency of the history that you're capturing? Maybe say more about that, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, so I think one thing that we struggled with on the archive were silences, right? So knowing that we're actively collecting around an important historical moment, and that even though we have 20,000 items and we collected so many diverse perspectives, there's still groups of people that are largely left out from the archive. Initially, I wanted, I think, to fill all the silences, not kind of understanding that that's an impossible task. So the best thing, in our approach to the project was for everyone to bring their strengths and perspectives on what they wanted to focus on. For me, I thought of collecting like an electric grid. Everything is intersected and connecting, but they're going off in different directions. So humor was an area that I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus on health inequities. And then I really wanted to make sure that I got oral histories done to try and get people to tell me about what the pandemic was like for them. So it means that it was kind of even exciting to go through the San Marcos archive to see what they collected and how they, the different items that they picked up items that I had never seen before. So it's useful in that way to see that there are so many ways to think about these materials. For JOPP, and I'm sure other projects, we thought it was going to be a semester-long project. We, like many, thought lockdown was going to do its job and we'd be back to normal much more quickly. So Journal of the Plague Years, it's evolved from what was once a rapid response archive, documenting kind of a finite moment, to something that continues to move along. So we call ourselves a rolling archive now. We're not rapid, we're rolling with the changes. We're trying to follow how the pandemic story shifts, and that shifts the way that we collect. It's also reflecting some of the people on the team that think some of the most interesting pandemic stories are actually what happens now. So now that we've kind of gotten through the most perhaps devastating part of COVID, what does life look like? How have people's lives been impacted? And in 10 years, where will people be? So in that sense, we're hoping to keep a longitudinal focus. We will shut down the Submit Your Story form, but we plan to kind of indirectly keep the archive open in the sense of going out and doing some longitudinal collecting to see where people are now and how things have changed for them.
So you had mentioned earlier the feeling now, understandable, about moving on, moving forward, remembering, but perhaps also forgetting and just moving on. Of course, that's the contours of that are quite similar. We see in histories of the 1918 influenza pandemic. Can you say a little bit about comparisons with previous pandemics, or how your thinking about the work you did was informed by what we know or don't know, the silences of other pandemics?
Yeah, so the 1918 pandemic is kind of the first one that comes to mind. One, and this is seen with social media, is that you can see how people respond to things. So I was looking at materials for 1918 influenza in newspapers a few weeks ago, and there were all kinds of remedies and concoctions that you could try. And this is a segment I didn't get to in this talk, but the kinds of home remedies that people try out to stave off COVID is another big theme in the archive. And there was this newspaper clipping that was recommending things, and one of them was to take alcohol and dab it on each side of your nose. And you read this in a newspaper, and I'm just dying to know, what do people think when they read that? How are they reacting? Did they think that this was sound advice or not? And so with the digital crowdsource collecting, you can see more of the response. If people think it's hocus pocus, or if they think maybe there's something to this. In terms of silences, one huge difference is that we were able to collect around children. For the 1918 influenza, you don't have a lot of good data on what it was like for children, what children felt. We've got a ton of oral histories and even just submissions from middle school children. Some instructors made it part of their weekly assignment to submit a plague journal, so they're telling you what they're feeling. Now, the richness of those sources varies, right? Sometimes it's just, a sarcastic sentence, and sometimes you get someone who has more to say. But having these perspectives, and even the perspectives of mothers, are different ways of thinking about who archives are for and who they represent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So these are questions emanating from me. So one among many of the peculiar aspects of the 1918 pandemic history and the historiography is trying to identify and surface where contemporaries expressed their awareness that they were going through a historic event during another historic time, which of course was World War I. Can you speak to how you saw in the source materials that you collected any awareness of the historic nature of the events, whether it's profoundly historic from a local perspective, from a family perspective, or from a larger community perspective? And then the other aspect of this is, to what extent does the material speak directly to memorialization, that we need to remember this era, we need to remember what's happened to our family, our neighborhood, our community? And I'm asking this question mindful of what you said so very well, that many people say, why does my story matter? So I don't want to project too much here, but I'm just curious about aspects of memorialization in the material that you collected, whether it was explicit or implicit. If you could speak to that, because as you well know, as a fellow historian, we think about these subjects in so many different ways. We also think about how those who lived through them were aware of what they were living through and how they perhaps attempted to memorialize those moments for future generations, or just to cope with them as they were unfolding.
Yeah. So a lot to think about.
Yes.
In terms of cognizance of being in an important historical moment, there are, especially in the first submissions to the archive, there's a real kind of alarm and awareness. You all will probably remember hoarding that was happening at supermarkets. So a lot of the early submissions are photos of empty supermarkets, shelves, and empty cities. So cities that once were bustling places. One of the early submissions to the Peru archive is just an empty city street in Lima, which is unusual. And people's reaction to this feeling of silence, right? So going out into public spaces and then being so much quieter, fewer airplanes flying overhead, less traffic, just kind of a reflection of the way that fear was driving different ways in the ways people consumed, but also that things were just quieter and slower. Shutdown, so lockdown, having to work from home or go to school online was another moment where people thought, this is different. And I think it was upsetting just with the timing in the US, with it being in March 2020. There are so many students and teachers who went home for spring break and never came back. They never saw their classroom again. And so that's really jarring for people. So the initial submissions are kind of hopeful that things are just, these Zoom classrooms are going to go away, but then they hang in and last longer than we expect. So these kind of changes and the fatigue with Zoom classrooms are other themes that you see in the archive. In terms of memorialization, we did end up creating a whole collection around deathways to kind of tag and separate those stories that are dealing with mourning, and not just mourning from COVID-19. There are several stories where people either talk about having COVID or losing someone to COVID, but there are also stories who talk about kind of the other cost of COVID, the other health cost, which is those people who couldn't get the regular medical attention they wanted or needed, not cosmetic, but needed medical attention, whatever that was, and how that may have contributed to a loss of life in 2020. So there are those stories as well, which are also, I account to a COVID loss, because if not for the pandemic, things might have worked out better for this individual because they could have had their regular care, or the medications that they needed wouldn't have been so expensive, or whatever changed. So it is kind of a question, I think, in the US and even with the archive, is when do we stop and mourn? When do we stop and allow ourselves to feel the toll of the loss and admit that this has been a really big deal, right? It's not just abstract numbers. These are lots of people. And there have been small mourning projects. But I think as an archive and even as a country, we haven't had that moment to say, and I don't know what that looks like. And it's a great question for the public humanities, is what is the best way to memorialize this moment, to honor the people that we've lost, and to learn from it? And what are those lessons that we need to take from it? You mentioned the 1918 influenza. There are public health norms that come up then that we didn't have before, which I think are just kind of fun facts, right? So spitting in public was one that goes away because, spit can obviously carry germs, and so not good. And there used to be at drinking fountains a cup, and you kind of fill up the cup at the drinking fountain, drink out of it, put it back. With 1918 influenza, that goes away. So I think it's sometimes an interesting exercise to think about, what do we have right now that's been a change that we think will stay? Some of the sneeze shields have stayed in place in supermarkets, but others are gone, right? In some cases, stores were happy to get rid of that. People are still wearing masks in some cases, but not all cases. So it'll be interesting to think about how have any of these norms or disruptions that we've implemented as normal practice, which ones will stick around and become part of American culture?
Thank you. So I have one more question for you, and then we'll conclude this great presentation and our dialogue. How has living through COVID changed the way you think about being a historian and being a historian of medicine? You've addressed this a little bit, but is there anything else you want to say? Because your project is so complex and multi-aspected. I mean, it is a history of recent years that are still happening, and it's going to be an incredible resource for future historians. So how has COVID changed the way you think about history and being a historian?
I think, there are kind of different waves of this too. I think in March 2020, it was just a sense of urgency that we have to document as much as we can. Now, in thinking about the long term, it's about access. How am I going to make sure that these materials are accessible? How am I going to make sure that people can get to these items? In the case of the Peruvian collection, we've worked on making some of the items bilingual so that they're more accessible, but not all of them. It hasn't been systematic, so that's an area that we need to kind of focus on, because as I mentioned, one of my mission is that the digital humanities are accessible to English and Spanish speaking audiences. Those are the languages that I have. So and those are the languages that I can share this with the appropriate audiences. So I want to make sure that happens. And it also, especially and I didn't get to talk about this, but in looking at the home remedies and natural remedies, this always creates something interesting and a kind of curiosity inside of me of what are these home remedies? Which ones are completely bogus, but which ones might have some validity? And what is the kind of tradition of medical knowledge that has gotten passed down to this point, maybe even from a past pandemic? As we know, when Europeans arrived to Peru, there are tons of pandemics and plagues and other things. So some of this knowledge, natural instinct tradition has to kind of be rooted in this larger medical history. And so thinking about that trajectory is fun as a historian of medicine, and working through that is difficult, right? You can't draw a straight line from 1550 to 2020, but it's interesting to see how, nevertheless, there's persistence of domestic and what is the best way to think about it? Like home medicine, right? So we are all healers in our own way. Parents heal children. If you have pets, you're the first line of hope for your animal, right? If they're sick. Mm-hmm. So in a way, we all operate with a certain amount of medical knowledge that we then pass on to the next generation. So that's kind of an interesting question that I want to get at more with this project.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, we've spoken about preservation and we've spoken about access, and by way of thanking you for this wonderful presentation and your time dedicated to putting it together, I'll remind those who are watching that Dr. Kole Peralta's presentation will be permanently available in the NIH Videocast archive in the next week or so, and we look forward to it being there, so that our reflections, your reflections on these historic years, will be part of an archive that future individuals can consult as they reflect. So it's a wonderful circular moment in many ways. So Dr. Kole Peralta, thank you very much for your presentation. It's been a privilege to work with you in this regard. Thank you for our mutual support. And thanks also, not only from the National Library of Medicine, but from the National Endowment for the Humanities and their support of this co-sponsored presentation. So best to you and your colleagues at Arizona State.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here, and I am so glad to hear you say the words permanently preserved. That's music to my ears. So thank you very much for having me. It's been a joy.
You're very welcome. Likewise. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.